Madam Clerk, would you read that item?
First Amendment, ground lease for property commonly referred to as 790 through 800 Durst Street between the City of Vallejo and Vallejo Marine Terminal, LLC. Recommendation, adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the First Amendment to the ground lease for the property commonly referred to as 790 through 800 Durst Street by and between the City of Vallejo and Vallejo Marine Terminal, LLC.
All right, Ms. Reynoso.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. So the city is the trustee for certain real property, generally referred to as 790 to 800 Durst Street. The property is generally located to the south of Lemon Street, adjacent to the Mare Island Channel. It's approximately 430,000 square feet, with approximately 251,100 square feet being dry land and approximately 179,000 square feet being submerged lands. Pursuant to state law, the city is the trustee for all tidelands and submerged lands within the City of Vallejo, and trust lands must be used in compliance with the public trust doctrine, including, but not limited to, maritime or water-dependent commerce, navigation and fisheries, preservation of the lands in their natural state for scientific study, open space, wildlife habitat, and water-oriented recreation. There is an entity that is interested in assuming this lease agreement. So the city back in 1991 entered into a lease agreement for this property with General Mills. That property was then sold to an entity called Brooks Brothers that went into foreclosure, and so it's now bank owned. And there's an entity, Vallejo Marine Terminal, who's interested in purchasing the property that was owned by General Mills, which is private property, and General Mills then had a lease agreement with the city for this submerged lands, for this trust state lands area. And the facility always worked with the two pieces of property working together. And so the buyer's interested in assuming this lease agreement with some certain amendments, which is essentially what's before you this evening. The buyer, their operation will generate some tax revenue for the city in the form of property tax revenue, utility user tax revenue, and some sales tax revenue potential. What the extent of that is still to be known. It would be operated as a terminal, which part of that operation is to sublease portions of the property for other businesses that need those facilities that are there, including the pier that has historically been used by General Mills, as well as the rail line that goes into the property that was also used by General Mills. And there are some entities that they're in negotiations with right now that are, one is a manufacturing facility that could generate significant revenue for the city. So that is a negotiation. It is not a done deal, but the user is a very high utility user, so there would be significant utility user tax for the city, as well as estimated $30 million capital investment, which would be significant property tax revenue for the city as well. It's an example of types of investment that could occur with this operator owning and operating the property. And it is, they are in negotiations. It is my understanding that they are also looking at a Southern California location as well. And so the lease agreement itself, the amendments, one is to extend the term. So the existing lease agreement was for a 25-year term with a 25-year extension. This lease agreement would allow for a 33-year term with a 33-year extension, which is what is allowed under state lands. It's a ground lease, and those typically are long-term lease agreements. And for the amount of investment that the purchaser is planning on taking, that is it is reasonable that they would want a long-term ground lease agreement. There's a few other items related to the lease amendment that are outlined in detail in your staff report. I'd be happy to answer any questions on any specific ones. The term was a very critical component. There is also a rent offset component. Currently, any lease revenue received from this property has to go into a state lands fund, which is a restricted fund. And so staff countered with the proposal that we would be willing to off-bate or recommend an abatement of rent as long as there was a sales tax or revenue to the city that was at least equal to that, which goes into the city's general fund, which is less restricted and allows the city to have more discretion with those dollars. And with that, I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Questions by council members? Council member McConnell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I received some questions from people in the neighborhood that I was unable to answer after reading the staff report, and they related to what's going to be transported on the trains and what's going to be manufactured at the plant.
Well, there are a number of different items that are being considered for transporting, and I'm sure that those could grow over time. What the purchaser has shared with us is lumber, possibly some steel, some grain. Those would be commodities that would be brought in via either rail and or ship. In terms of the manufacturing facility, those negotiations have been highly confidential, so we're not really privy to exactly what manufacturing commodities could come about.
Okay, well, I think the motivation for the questions was a concern as to whether there would be any toxic chemicals transporting through their neighborhood or at the site, and what type of noise involvement may be present. This will have to go to the Planning Commission, I'm assuming, at some time, right?
The initial use prescribed by the applicant or the lessee would not. It is currently zoned appropriate for the use that they want to undertake. In terms of a project that could come from a manufacturing entity, that would be a separate discretionary action that would. But so for the terminal use itself, the initial use of transporting goods and bringing in, that is consistent with the current zoning. So there isn't a conditional use permit. There is no discretionary action to be taken by the Planning Commission. But anything in excess of that, so another manufacturing facility, that would need to go through the Planning Commission, and the appropriate environmental review would be necessary.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember Sampaio?
Thank you, Mayor Davis. I hope I didn't miss this in your staff report, but if we're going to use it as a port, somebody's going to have to pay to have it dredged, obviously. Is that going to fall on us, or will it fall on these developers?
It will not fall on us. It would be a cost of the developer or owner.
Well, that sounds like a very exciting project. Thank you.
Councilmember Gomes?
I'd like to offer the resolution to adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the First Amendment to the ground lease for the property.
All right, would you resolution, please?
Mayor, I'm sorry, but it is appropriate to allow the public to comment on all action items.
Was this a public hearing?
It's not a public hearing, but the public still does have a right to comment
Okay.
if there are cards.
I don't have any cards. So should I call for cards?
I think it's appropriate to just ask the public whether or not they have a comment, either now or perhaps at the beginning of the action item. We'll do it better next time.
All right. Anybody out there want to talk? Okay. Not on this item. All right.
Motion carries unanimously with Vice Mayor Hannigan absent.
All right. The next item is item 8D.